I'm so excited today to have Frankie Fihn on the podcast. Frankie has built 3 different agencies, up to 100+ clients, worked with thousands of people, and has been on stages with some of the biggest names in numerous industries. He's also written a best-selling book, Beyond the Agency Box, the phoneless, meetingless digital marketing agency that creates lifetime happy clients without Facebook ads, webinars, Google, or SEO. He's also a connoisseur of dad jokes. Frankie, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for being on the show, man.
Well, thank you, William, for throwing in that dad joke bit. That's probably the most important part there.
As a lifelong connoisseur myself, I always appreciate it when I find someone who also appreciates, really, I think, the pinnacle of humor.
Yeah, totally.
Welcome to Catalytic Leadership, the podcast designed to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. Here is your host, author, and leadership and executive coach, Dr. William Attaway.
I'd love to start with you sharing a bit of your story with our listeners, particularly around your journey and your development as a leader.
Yeah.
How did you get started?
You know, it's funny because it's a thing. It's become a thing in the last 5-10 years where people want to be travel the world, work on my laptop, do anything. And I've been in that world for 20 years, but I never woke up one day and said, this is what I wanted to do. It was 2007. And a lot of you guys remember the financial crisis of 2008. My hometown of Windsor, Ontario, Canada, which is 5 minutes from Detroit. So it's like Detroit without all the gunshots. You can still hear them, but you're close enough not to get hit. But basically everybody growing up either works for Ford, General Motors, or Chrysler, or a supplier of Ford, General Motors, or Chrysler, or a business that depends on them. And around 2007, the whole recession started a year before that. And Ford, I remember General Motors announced one day they closed the plant, laid 10,000 people off in a day. And all of a sudden, I'd always dreamed of being an entrepreneur, but I kind of always fell back on the job, the job, and it was kind of just taken from me. It was I remember actually going to a hiring fair, and there were 50 people there, and every single job was a commission only, sell insurance, sell investments. And I realized if I'm going to have to sell something, I'm going to sell my own thing. Didn't really know what I wanted to sell. And a friend of mine, just happenstance, called me up on the phone and said, hey, I wrote a real estate course and we're going to sell it on the internet. And I kind of laughed. I was like, we? I was like, dude, you're selling your own fucking real estate course. And he was like, yeah, but I'm not any good with computers. And I'm like, I've never built a website. I've never sold anything online. I know how to fix a computer, but I'm like, that's about it. And he's like, yeah, but you can figure it out. I can't figure it out. And then he hung up the phone on me. And I remember after 3 days, I was like, well, what else do you have? And so we ended up building this thing, for the real estate course. And I had to kind of, in the process, self-teach myself SEO. It was how do you get people to a website? I was I kind of self-taught that. And I remember one day somebody came along, and I don't remember the exact amount, but they offered to buy the website from me for orders of magnitude more than I was making. It wasn't a crazy amount, but it was $4 or $5 grand or something like that. And we were making a couple $100 a month in course sales, and I hadn't really figured everything out. And we sold it, and I didn't really know what I was going to do after that. And somebody reached out to me and said, that SEO thing you did for somebody else, can you do it for me? And so I ended up, in this world of starting this whole digital marketing agency. But it's not like I woke up one day and said, this is what I want to do. And then as you know, it often leads you as you grow and you scale the thing and you start hiring people and building a team, you're in a leadership role. And it's often a big adjustment, because it's not like I woke up one day and said, I want to be a leader. I want to step up and do things. Yeah. It was almost like, you're just trying to keep up with the workload and the things that you have, and you start bringing in people. And like most people, I knew very, 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 very little about that, and never read any books, and didn't even really have good models. A lot of the places I had worked for as an employee had really bad systems and scales. So I learned to do it all the wrong way, just modeling all the the factories and stuff I had done, but I never woke up one day and said, hey, I want to be this digital entrepreneur and travels the world and stuff like that. It was really almost like my plan B was taken from me, and I was kind of just thrust into it. And now I had to suddenly, figure out a way to make it work.
Wow. And marketing agency space is it's a pretty unique world. You actually described it in your book as one of the hardest businesses to scale.
Yeah.
Why did you describe it that way?
Well, a lot of the best stuff I actually learned because I want to say like somewhere around like 2015, 2016, somewhere in there, I started getting invited to the best attorney masterminds in the world. And it was kind of like a dear friend of mine who owns an industry association. They wanted somebody to come in and talk to them about their SEO, but they were afraid that if they brought somebody in, and by then I had already like moved on from my first agency, and I didn't do SEO anymore. And so that was why they wanted me, because they're like, everybody else is going to try and sell us something, but we can just ask for this sort of unvarnished truth. And what I realized when I was sitting there listening to their problems and them talking about scaling, it was literally identical. That growing a law firm and growing a marketing agency have more in common than they do difference. The common unique challenge I realized, anytime you do like a service business where you are essentially the deliverable, it is very, very, very easy to build a prison. It's very, very easy for you to become the deliverable, for every client you have to want access to you, for you to be the name and face of the company. And as a result, like all of a sudden, the biggest constraint in the business is you and your time and your attention and how much people want it. And so like it's a beautiful business model in that it's probably one of the easiest in the world to get started. Like literally you just need a laptop and some internet and like a little bit of grit. But the flip side of that is when you actually go to scale it, it's like compare that to like say like a software business where you're just sort of copying and pasting the same deliverable and the software is the deliverable. Or I think about people who are building like AI chat bots right now. It's like the chat bot is the heavy lifting. Or you think about like McDonald's that has like this franchise like precision. But our business model, like it absolutely can be scaled. And I hear all the time from people who say, oh, the marketing agency doesn't scale. But it's really, really tricky, and it's very, very easy for you to become the product. And as a result, for it, like, just to present all sorts of challenges for like, when you want to make it bigger and hit that next sort of level.
Mm. And I would think if you're I call it being at the center of the spider web, where everything connects to you, right? Where
Yeah.
everything crosses your desk, that feels like a very fast path eventually to burnout.
Yeah, that's a fact. But yeah.
So for folks listening that are like, oh, that's me. You just described me. Like that's what I've built. I've built that prison.
Yeah.
Now what? What do they do now?
Well, there's obviously like more than one way to be successful. So I don't want to say like this is the answer, but I'll tell you guys what's worked for us. Is one of the things I described in the book is the difference between what I would call custom and customization. And they sound very similar, but they create a dramatic difference in experience. And custom is when you're solving a brand new problem every time for somebody. So in the beginning, basically anybody who showed up with a credit card and said, can you do paid ads? Can you make a website for me? Do you do SEO? Like the answer was always yes. And so I did anything and everything that paid me. But what I didn't realize is there's a hidden metric in it, the energy required to fulfill on it. And each time I did it, I was solving a new problem. So I had to find new freelancers and things like that. And ultimately, what I came to realize is that customization is like when you think about McDonald's, when McDonald's first scaled, they only had burgers. In fact, even the fries and the Coke came later. But when McDonald's was first established, it was like literally just a burger. And so they would customize it for you. Like if you said, can you hold the onions? Because I don't like onions. I'm sure they would. If you said, can I get an extra pickle? They'd probably give you an extra pickle. But if you came in and said, like, can you make me pizza? Or do you guys do catering? They would probably say no. And so one of the hardest things to do when you first start like scaling it is the discipline to say no and make yourself about one type of person where you solve one problem. So the first thing is, I think a lot of people have issues scaling because it's a structure issue. And then the second thing is, once you have one thing that you're doing over and over, like burgers, once you can begin to build like a factory of burgers where you can start to map out like these are the processes and sequences and bring in good people to help you with that. So when you're on like the verge of burnout, it's usually only a few places. Either you're literally just doing too much stuff or you're too involved in the burger making when it's actually done. And for me, like I'm sure a lot of leaders can relate to this. I had a really hard time letting go because I just felt like nobody did it like me, and it was never done. It's easier to do it myself, and all the kind of platitudes people say. And it wasn't until I started mapping out this is how I believe it should be done the right way, and then it's like we can bring in people to do it my way because we have a step by step of instructions. And sometimes it's hard to do because you're like fighting fires in the moment, and it slows you down to like map out a process or whatever. But like it buys you back so much time later, and so you have to kind of have the discipline. Like, yeah, this thing might take me twice as long now to do it and to document it at the same time, but almost always like it's really just like more than anything, it's a structure issue. Either you're doing too many things on the front end, you're a little bit of everything to everybody, or on the back end side of it, on the actual fulfillment, you're way too involved in the burger making, and then as a result, you become the bottleneck in the whole thing. And like I know I understand why a lot of people do that. Like I said, like in the beginning, I had a really hard time finding good people, and I felt like nobody could do it like me, and I had some super secret skill set that wasn't easy to train or to hire. And by the way, none of that is true. But those beliefs will keep you stuck for a long time.
I love the way you're describing this, and I think you're definitely painting a picture of that path to freedom from that prison cell that so many people have created. Did you know this going in, or did you learn this the hard way? This idea of the structure, the systems, the importance of delegating. Is this something you just intuitively knew?
No, this was totally baptism by fire. In fact, I can actually remember, like, I had a part-time factory job, and I remember at the start of the shift, everybody would be sitting in the break room, and then like the supervisor of the shift would come in, and he'd go, who knows how to work the Volkswagen Line A? And then six people would put up their hand, and he'd pick one of them. You go over and do that one. And I remember when I was new, I knew nothing, so my hand didn't go up for anything because I legitimately didn't know anything. But I remember it like in hindsight, it was one of the most disorganized operations I've ever seen because like you didn't know what you were going to do in advance. And so like for actually the first like 5 years, this is how I ran my company when we ended up having like at some point like 35, 40 virtual assistants. And rather than having a schedule and repeat tasks and training and materials, they would just come to me every morning like a supervisor in the break room go like, what do you want me to do today, boss? And it was actually exhausting because when you have 40 people, even if it only takes you 2 minutes to instruct each person, like you spend like almost 2 hours, 3 minutes a person. Like you spend 2, 3 hours just delegating, and that was like every day was like that for me. And it wasn't really like my big breakthrough. Like I said, it was probably around 2016 when I started. Um, like one of the things that like you mentioned like in my book I have a thing called the 5 stages of agency growth, and it describes the journey of going from a single solo freelancer to then hiring a small team, but you're still kind of doing the fulfillment of the work to then eventually you become like a full-time manager where you don't touch any of the day-to-day but you lead a team. Then eventually you have like a CEO and you have almost like a corporate-y feel, but at the same time like often like that's when the quality of your brand slips. And then where you either get to the level even past that where you're like franchising or building multiple agencies or whatever it is you want to do. And to be honest with you, I remember like when I was sitting with some of the top lawyer stuff and some of the top masterminds, they brought in a guy, one of Dan Kennedy's guys, who was talking about the 5 stages of growing a law firm, and he described the journey you go through in a service business. And it was a giant aha for me because everything he was describing, even though he's describing it for attorneys, I'm like, oh, this is like 97% the same. And so, like, even though I get all the credit for bringing it, the truth is there's people than me that were smarter than me and figured it out. And that's when it's, started getting into things like leadership and reading, books like The E-Myth of how do you build like systematic processes and things like that. But I think I honestly did like a terrible job of it for like 10 years. So like a lot of times people look at this and feel like, oh, like I have people say to me like now, like, oh, you're a natural on video. And I can remember in 2007 when my friend Matt and I were recording videos, and he said, why don't you do the videos? You know all this stuff as well as I do. I'm like, I'm no good on video. You're better than me. And I tried doing a video or two, had an outtake or two and thought, I'll never get this. And I'm just not a video person. It's funny now, I got like thousands and thousands of videos on the internet. But I can remember, not being able to do that. And so I think it's like, that's my way of saying it's an acquired skill. Like, I don't think you wake up one day and you're just magically an awesome leader. It's like, it's practice, it's study, it's a lot that goes into it. And I think it's like, as you know, it's like, it's an ever evolving process. Like, you don't ever feel like you've fully arrived and you're complete and now all the boxes are checked and we never have to do anything ever again. The opposite is you're always looking for that next 1% thing you can grow day by day, and then a lot of those things compound over time. But for me, it definitely did not come naturally. The opposite. I feel like I did this badly for 10 years, and there was nobody who could tell me I was doing it like poorly for like 10 years, because a lot of the stuff that is available in our space now, like books and courses and training and masterminds and communities, like they may have existed, but I didn't know of any of them back then. So I kind of like felt like I was just taking arrows to the chest, trying to find a path through the forest and kind of digging out our own path. But eventually, when you do figure it out, like the one real positive is like when you get your ass kicked learning a lesson for like 7 years, by the time you figure it out, you never forget it. Like you never, ever, ever forget it, because you're like, I spent like 2,000 days in a row doing this wrong. And when I finally figured it out, like, look, you're hanging on to that.
Wow, that's so true. Those are the lessons, right? The ones that stick. So thinking about your journey and hearing so much of where you have been, what does it look like now? Like, what does your leadership look like these days?
So with the team that we have and like actually leading people, like I said, I never really even conceptualized myself as a leader. It's like one of those things you're just trying to hire help to get work off your plate. One of the things that like I wrote about my book, an idea I called the more beach, less laptop sort of lifestyle. And what's amazing to me is my team operates the same way. So I can remember like years ago, again, I did all this badly, but they told me like, you want to get people for 40 hours a week. I didn't know how to do that with remote workers. So I had all this like time tracking software, and I like could measure like when they logged into work and were they staying on point and all those things. And one of the things that's changed is like, as a leader, like I just talk to people about outcomes. I'm like, listen, you don't need to spend 40 hours in front of a screen to make me happy as a boss. I just want these things done, and I want them done the way I want them. But if you want to do that at 3 in the morning, if you want to do that, whenever, and as long as we're like, we have open lines of communication about it, like you have total freedom and autonomy to do what you want. And it's kind of amazing. I see like now, like some of my virtual assistants in the Philippines, for example, like they travel around the Philippines and they go from like vacation space. And I think that's amazing because they're able to, create outcomes, but not like be tied to, um, constantly doing stuff. And that's part of it for me, is like, I want my team to have a good life too. Like it's, and then as far as like, how I mean, I'm not saying we have it all figured out, but we have a pretty good life setup. Like I live right over there is the ocean out my window. And, we have, a lot of help too here in person. And a lot of it, I think, as originally when I looked at leadership, it was I looked at it like people work for me, and I always kind of felt like as a boss, you sort of own somebody. Like like I had that sense of like, you're my employee, you do what I say when I say I'm going to do it. And I look at it as the opposite. I in many ways I feel owned by my employees now, where it's like I want them to best succeed. I want them to be able to do what's most possible. I want to put them in the best position to win. And it's changed the game because you see it way more as a kind of service rather than a and one of the things I remember changing for me is I joined or I hired a mentor like um, years ago, and it was one of the big mistakes I made. So I don't know, I think I invested like 15 or 20 grand or something like that, and the guy literally bailed on me right after. And I ended up with a cool community out of it because there were other people that had invested with this person. But one of the things that I found most interesting is that at that point, like I had a bunch of clients, and whenever clients made requests of me, I kind of just felt like I couldn't say no, because it was like, you're paying me, so how can I say no to requests? And I remember this guy just didn't feel that way. Like he just like, I just sent him like 15 or 20 grand, and he wouldn't even return my phone, like messages or whatever. Like, when are we going to do something, kind of thing. But it showed me something that like, just because you're paying somebody, you don't own them, right? Like he really did adopt that mentality. And so I've always kind of like taken that away where now, like I don't look at employees like property, the opposite. I see them as autonomous people. And it shows up in little ways. Like, I don't know if any of you guys have read Never Lose a Customer Again by Joey Coleman, but I think all of the principles go into hiring. And like a lot of the things he talks about in that book are little unexpected extras. So I think like, sometimes I'll give him a little bonus for work well done, or like one of my guys loves to read books, so I buy him like a new book every like 2-3 weeks, and just little things that show like I actually care. I want you to succeed. But I think the longer I do this, the more I see it as like you are in service to your team and you're setting them up to best win. And then what ends up happening is a lot of the culture, at least things that you're trying to create, fall into place because people actually like working with you. They have fun doing it. It's like it's not a high stress environment. Everybody's expected to perform, but it's like I know we have a really casual, laid back kind of whatever work culture is, but like that's what works for us. I'm not saying that's the right solution for everybody in every situation, but like that's kind of how it's evolved for us.
You just described in a very clear and practical way a strong pillar or component of what I call catalytic leadership.
Yeah.
Which is that you don't see yourself as the one being served. You are the one who is serving.
Yeah.
You are the one who is investing in your team. And you do that by knowing them, by seeing them, and by hearing them. I think listening is one of the most underutilized skills in a leader's tool bag. What you just described there, I mean, down to, he's a reader, so I buy him books, I mean, things like that, knowing those kind of things about your team, when they know that you know those things, they feel seen, they feel known.
Yeah.
And when somebody feels known, seen, and heard, they lean in, and they're not going to run down the street for another few bucks because they feel like they're being invested in a place and with a team that cares about them. I love the way you describe that.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I'm not surprised. I mean, you've been teaching people for 30 years and I've been doing this 20. So I'm not surprised we independently came to some of the same conclusions, but you're totally right. It's like, you realize the longer you do it, the more your team succeeds, the more you succeed, right? Because like,
yes,
they do all the little extras for you. They do the little extra things for the clients. They'll go above and beyond and go the extra mile. Like a little thing, like I don't demand my team ever to message me back on weekends, but they do, right?
Yes.
And it's not because like I'll crack the whip and go, "Where were you on Saturday?" It's more just because like we like each other. We really do. And
right.
We all want it to work, and we all have these kind of like, not that I expect you to finish it on Saturday, but like they always get back to me and things like that on a weekend.
I love that model. I love that culture. And I think you either have a culture you've created on purpose in your company, or you have a culture you didn't mean to create.
Yeah.
And most often is not healthy. And yours is so intentionally built and designed and curated. And I'm confident that you are passionate about protecting that and not allowing somebody to take that and drive that into a ditch that is not your idea.
Yeah. And it's certainly, a big part of that, I learned over the years that, hiring to me is really like, I think about like, I watch, stupid cooking shows. And one of those is like, Gordon Ramsay has Hell's Kitchen, and, it's this big dramatic thing where he swears lots and all that. But I look at it as like he's actually hiring a chef for his restaurants. It's a hiring process. Mm-hmm. He's figured out how to turn it into content and monetize it. But at the end of the day, what he's doing as a hiring process, and what he creates is a series of what I would call battle tests to see, like, can you recreate menu items? Can you? And there are things an actual chef would have to know how to do. How do you perform in service? And as so much of that is like when you bring somebody new into your team, it's like what most people do are just like job interviews. And I don't know about you, but I was always one of those people who aced job interviews, but I was never built to be an employee. So I'd always get hired, but then I'd make for a shitty employee because it's not meant to be one. And
that's funny.
But I always feel like job interviews like can bring you the wrong people, and the more you you set up a series of battle tests, the more you like kind of protect what you're describing, where you want, because ultimately like I want people who are performers, but I also like it's a laid back, casual work environment on purpose, right? Like
Yeah.
we're fun, we laugh, we have a good time. It's everybody's expected to get things done, but nobody's there cracking the whip going. And I don't want people I need
Yep.
to crack the whip with either, right?
Exactly. Because then you have a whole different culture,
Yeah.
right? And it demands something very different of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I can actually think about it in my former life at Ford. I eventually worked my way up after like I don't know 4, 5, 6 months, something like that, as a floor supervisor. So I was middle management, and it's a totally different thing when it was one of the most toxic work environments I've ever seen because everybody was negative about everything, and it was a very like blame centered culture. So like ultimately like things weren't working and everybody pointed the finger. So often you'd have to like document things you did and why you did them because you knew at Friday's meeting you were going to have to cover your ass and explain why you did this, why are you doing that, and there was very little collaboration towards the end goal. But the actual worst part of it for me was I had no say in the team I had. I had like just like you just inherited this kind of like team of misfits, and you got to try and get to the end goal. As where I think when you're an entrepreneur, it's your own thing. You're not bound by just having this team of like some of my guys, like it was like being real, like they were like raging alcoholics, and in most work environments you probably get fired for that, but in a big powerful union like you don't, you just get paid time off for it. And so like you have a guy who's like driving a forklift truck and you're like, is that guy drunk today? I need to find out.
Wow.
And you're still responsible for production and outputs, and you're still going to have to go into a meeting and get yelled at about the numbers. And I just say that because like sometimes seeing how bad it can be gives you an example of also like what's possible, where you say, hey, I'm not going to have just random people on my team. I'm not just gonna um, have crazy people. I'm not going to have this angry blah, blah, blah. We are going to get things done. We are going to solve problems. It is going to be collaborative. We're going to have open lines of communication. Everybody's going to talk to everybody else with respect. And like, it sounds like really basic, but a lot of times, as you know, it's more just the basics done well than it is any like sort of magic technique or whatever.
So true. So true. Frankie, your business needs you to lead, and your team and your clients need you to lead at a higher level today than was true 2, 3, 4 years ago. And that same thing is going to be true 2, 3, 4 years from now. How do you stay on top of your game? How do you level up with the new leadership skills that you're going to need and your team is going to need you to have for the years to come?
It's such a good question, but I think some of us, and I'm sure this is the same for you, like I'm literally just built that way, like where I have to like continuously improve. Like it's funny, like I've had people say to me, I'm bored. And I'm like, if I sit down for 5 minutes, like I'll have 100 ideas, and then I'll have a bunch of things I want to do and not be bored. So I don't necessarily know what the future holds, but I know that like continuous self development is going to be part of it. And what ends up happening is when you're built that way, like it's pretty normal to also have like a team that's built that way because like I kind of joke with my team, but I'm like, man, like I'm gonna have a new idea about how we can make this better like every 5 minutes. So like if that's not your kind of environment, like you're probably not going to want to come in the door, right? But at the same time, like if you like the challenge of figuring out new stuff and moving forwards and opportunities for advancement and those kind of things. So I don't necessarily have like a plan of action for it because like for me, I like it's a thing I can't even turn off if I want to turn off. But it's like we read books, we go to conferences, we talk to people. I'm always collaborating about big ideas and having conversations. Like I don't even know how to turn it off at this point. The one thing I will say that it's made challenging is I have friends and family and stuff in the they're still in like the 9 to 5 kind of job world and stuff. I find them harder and harder to relate to as time goes on. So like I've really kept up my network of people like such as yourself that like just don't have a normal kind of traditional kind of life. But I don't necessarily have a good answer for that other than just like I don't even know how to turn that off. So it's going to happen one way or another. It's only a question of where it's going.
I think that's a fantastic superpower, frankly.
Yeah. It's a blessing and a curse, though. I saw Karen Haidt posted about how she said, I sat down and made a decision I was going to take it easier, and then I thought of a new project, and now I'm not taking it.
Hey, every blessing has a shadow side to it, right? Every good thing has that shadow side, and it's learning how to navigate that.
Yeah.
It's so true. You are a continual learner, and we've been talking about that most of this conversation. Is there a book or a podcast that you have read or listened to that you think, oh man, this is something that if you haven't read this or listened to this would be worth checking out?
Yeah, I actually took it off the shelf because I knew you were going to ask me that question. This baby right here is one I like to revisit. It's by Dusan Dukovic. It's called Straight Line Leadership, and it's one of those things that like it's probably more reminder than necessarily like it'll blow your mind. But there's so many like good little gems in there that remind me of like and one of the things he talks about in there that's always been big for me, he talks about your internal stance, like the place you're coming from. And he talks about the idea, like, say, for example, every January 1st, people make New Year's resolutions. They're going to make more money. They're going to lose more. They're going to lose weight. They're going to find that partner. And the vast majority of those people, like, don't see those through. And by February 1st have abandoned them and given up on those. And he talks a lot about, like, the place you're coming from has a lot to do with whether you succeed in the external action. I mean, for me, I try and remind myself of like what kind of commitment and things are really required. Like, like using the exercise one as an example. I started exercising again like 6 months ago, and I've kept it up. But one of the things you have to commit to is you realize after like 2-3 weeks, you're going to be really, really sore, and you're not going to want to do it. And so, like, can I keep it up? Can I stay committed through that process? And this book has been really helpful with lots of those little things about just getting my internal stance right, so that the external things fall into place. Because most people know you got to like diet and exercise. It's a totally different thing to then go do it in action. And a lot of times it's the place they're coming from, not the actual thing they're doing. And I see this like with agency owners. Like I have conversations on the daily about people who message a stranger and are expecting them to stand on their chair and hurl their credit card at them, and then are disappointed when they don't. And it's really just an uncalibrated internal stance. And so Straight Line Leadership for me is always like I probably read it every 6 months, and always like pick up something kind of new in it.
That's a super high recommendation, and I haven't read this book, so I'm about to. So thank you for that.
I think you'll like it.
Frankie, this has been, as every conversation I've had with you, this has been enlightening, and I always walk away having learned something. I so appreciate your generosity in sharing some insights and wisdom from your journey so far. And I know the best days are still to come for you.
This is fun for me too, just so you know.
I know folks are going to want to stay connected to you and continue to learn from you and more about what you do. What is the best way for them to do that?
2 ways. So I'd say the 2 best ways. We got a book over here you can find on Amazon called Beyond the Agency Box. And to be honest, like even though I wrote it for agency owners, if you run any sort of service expertise kind of business, everything in here would apply to you. Even though obviously I wrote it for agency owners because that's what I did for 20 years. But having said that, it's really, like I said, a lot of the best stuff I really learned from attorneys and then figured out how to adapt them to the agency space, which is why they work so well. And then if you guys are on Facebook as well, I have a Facebook community called Beyond Agency Profits, Agency Lifestyle Design, and I think it's a really cool place. I've been really intentional about keeping high level people such as yourself in there. So a lot of Facebook groups after 5 minutes become like spam groups where, or they just kind of disappear into the night. But I've intentionally cultivated it to be a place where basically like all the cool kids hang out and discuss the what's working.
And I can attest to both of those. I can attest to the value of the book. That is something that has benefited me in my business already after having read it. And some of the insights in there are things that our team has applied. And the Facebook group is something I see value in every time I log in there. And so thank you for, again, your generosity, not just today, but in an ongoing way of sharing what you're learning for the benefit of other people.
Well, I appreciate that, my man. It's funny. For me, it's probably the easiest thing in the world to have empathy for people who were just you 5 or 10 years ago. Because when I first started this, I think the first 6 to 12 months, I was sleeping on my girlfriend's couch. And I think anybody who starts a new venture has what I would call the anti-cheerleader. For me, it was the father-in-law. I'm like, when are you going to get a real job? And like always condescendingly referred to it as my little side hustle. And, being able to like give back to people who are, essentially me from before, like, like as you can relate to, like when you were, I'm sure, figuring out your own leadership journey, it's not like you probably imagined I would ever be showing this to someone else. You're probably just struggling with your own stuff. And then eventually you realize this can actually be useful to someone else.
Yeah, exactly right, man.
Yeah.
Frankie, thanks. This has been a great conversation, and I'm so grateful for you, man.
Appreciate you, my dude.
Thanks for joining me for this episode today. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do two things. First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, if you don't have a copy of my newest book, Catalytic Leadership, I'd love to put a copy in your hands. If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can get a copy for free. Just pay the shipping so I can get it to you, and we'll get one right out. My goal is to put this into the hands of as many leaders as possible. This book captures principles that I've learned in 20 plus years of coaching leaders in the entrepreneurial space, in business, government, nonprofits, education, and the local church. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. And if you're ready to take a next step with a coach to help you intentionally grow and thrive as a leader, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to catalyticleadership.net to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, leaders, choose to be catalytic.
Thanks for listening to Catalytic Leadership with Dr. William Attaway. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Want more? Go to catalyticleadership.net.